Welcome to another episode of Leader Seeds Podcast. My name is Jordan, and I'm glad to host and facilitate these great conversations on high impact and healthy leadership. If this is your first time listening to the podcast, I want to say thank you for checking it out. I invite you to go ahead and listen to the entire podcast as we work to bring value from the beginning to the end. If you're one of our faithfuls from the beginning, or maybe you heard something before and you came back, I'd like to say thank you and welcome back. Now, in today's conversation, we are talking to Juli Geske-Peer, and Juli is the founder of the company Peer Performance Solutions. Now, this is a company that's focused on enhancing individual and organizational performance. They specialize in facilitating exceptional leadership and relationship skills. Juli has a master's degree in organizational leadership and over 20 years of consulting and management experience. She is also the author of the book 5 Senses for Success, which is all about strategies to thrive in any area. So listen in closely as Juli will identify the 5 senses for success. She will help us understand them and she will help us implement them today. With every episode, there's always resources at the end and great ways to stay connected, so look for those. And I encourage you that the moment you hear something that resonates, that's something that adds value to your day, to hit that like button, to share this with a friend, to leave a comment, and to even go ahead and rate and review this wherever you're listening on. We greatly appreciate that as we're continuing to reach more and more people with high impact and healthy leadership. Such an important thing in today's world. Now, without further ado, let's go ahead and listen in to the conversation. Hey everyone, welcome to another conversation here with the Leader Seeds Podcast. It's me, Jordan. You guys see me every week, but more importantly, I want to invite you to our special guest today. Her name is Juli Geske-Peer. Juli, I want to say hi to all of the Leader Seeds community.
I am so thrilled to be here, Jordan. Thank you so much. And hi to everyone. I'm really excited to be here and have a conversation today. So great to be here.
Right on, right on. We really, our goal is to kind of provide like really impactful conversations, and just knowing from the conversations that we've had, I'm excited for what we can bring here to the podcast today. I'm excited for the work that you're doing, but also on, I think even on our quick conversations on just the alignment in how you do the work, right? A lot of times it's the same kind of type of work, but it's a certain way that we can do the work. And just to see what you've done, by founding the Peer Performance Solutions, right? That's a company that you are the founder of, right?
Correct. That is correct. I founded it back in 2014 on a full-time basis. I dabbled in it before that when I was still full-time employed as a leader in
Wow. And you and I know, and anybody out there listening in the community, that's no easy task. That's not just a stroll in the park.
No, there's a fair amount of work involved. It's kind of funny because when I left full-time employment, I thought I would start my business so I'd have more time to do things like writing. And it turned out that I had a lot more to do in my business than I ever envisioned. So yes, I agree with you.
I know I had a friend of mine that was telling me that did something similar. And it's like, if we knew everything that it would take, we probably wouldn't have done it. So it's good that we don't know everything in the beginning, because it's quite a bit. But at the same time, it's it's a passion. It's something driving you, pushing you further. So that's why I love what you're doing with Peer Performance and with the book that we'll talk about today. But like we do at Leader Seeds, we like to open up with kind of just an open question. So us here at Leader Seeds can get to know you a little bit more for the person that you are, for the awesome person that you are. And today's question that came to mind that I'd love to kind of start with, Juli, would be, I think we all kind of have a favorite mealtime, and I don't know if we've ever decided it yet, but when we're asked, it's like, what would be a favorite mealtime, breakfast, lunch, or dinner? Which one do you find yourself more excited for?
Well, I really do. If I had to choose one of those, I like food in general, so that's a hard choice. But if I had to choose one, I would have to say breakfast or maybe even moving into brunch. So I really like breakfast type foods, eggs, breakfast meats like bacon or sausage. So I think I would have to choose that one, breakfast.
Breakfast.
Yeah.
you know,
What's
it,
yours?
it's funny. Thanks for asking. It's funny you mentioned that because I'm the same. I like just the meal time, like when people can come together, the experience of it. But but my breakfast meals, same thing. We actually had waffles last night with hash browns for dinner. So sometimes we will actually have breakfast food for dinner. That's something me and my family just does. I don't know.
I think that's wonderful. And actually, my family of origin did that too, as well. So every once in a while we do now, but more often in the daytime. I love it though. I think you should go for it.
Right, right. It's fun, and I think you can't ever go too wrong with waffles and hash browns or however you do breakfast. There's a good hearty breakfast, and there's a good you can have some fruits or yogurt, but I enjoy that too. So thanks for sharing that with us. It's just an awesome way to kind of see a little bit more of the personal side of our guests, and now we can talk professional side.
That sounds great. And I will just kind of piggyback on your thought of gathering though too, because I think what I like about brunch is usually when I'm doing a formal brunch, it is about family and friends gathering. And so I envision going out to a restaurant. It's fun. It's a gathering. So I agree with you on
Right, right. And that's I I appreciate that you went into that really quickly because I would even share too on something that I've learned is that um not every meal for me is actually gathering. Like sometimes I'm like the eat while you work by myself, right, in a sense. But those aren't ever memorable. Those aren't ever. I mean, I get through it, but they're not. I don't remember. I can't remember the last time I did that. I just maybe it's more effective in a day or getting more done. But what I do remember is the times when I sat down and we just had a meal, and sometimes it's like a 2 hour meal, which is crazy for me because I'm like, oh, I gotta get things going, but that time to kind of gather and connect with people is very impactful. So thank you for touching into that.
that. No problem.
And today, our conversations here at Leader Seeds are always about high impact and healthy leadership. And that's why I think I get excited when I get to know a little bit more about what our guest is working on and what they've kind of like what you've already done. Like you said, from 2014, you were working on with peer performance solutions, right? But you also have this year that you released a book, right? This
I
year.
did. Yes. So back
Wow.
in late May, I released my book, Five Senses for Success, Strategies to Thrive in Any Arena. And I'm thrilled because it's been a very, very long journey for me to get to that publishing point. I started the book back in 2015 after I'd been in business for a while, about a year full time on my own. And it took a long time to get to the publishing point because there would be times when I would just set it aside and let it languish as I struggled with my own self confidence and my own willingness to be vulnerable because there are some stories in the book that are very personal and frankly share some of my own failings. And so I wanted to use those as a way to illuminate the concepts I was discussing. But it was really hard for me to get to the point of, okay, it's okay to share these. It's okay to put this public thing out there. I think, I was struggling with trying to understand my spiritual purpose. That's how I think anyway. And I feel like sharing what I do know is part of that purpose. And so I had to, do a lot of internal work to get to the point of being willing to put it out.
Wow. I didn't know that. And hearing that for the first time directly from you, the author, the first thing that immediately pops in my mind is that I've always, I've heard that what makes a great book is when the author doesn't just give you their external view. Like there's a part of reading a book is that you can actually get into, you can see how the author thinks. You can actually almost feel what they went through. And the fact that you put that much into the book, like it wasn't just 3 steps that you do or 3 practices. This is something that you like you're saying, you're sharing some real life situations that took some sense of vulnerability to kind of open up there. And I really think that's special, to be honest with you. I think that's kind of a compliment as a reader when you can read an author that does that process there. So right off the bat, thank you for going through that. I do agree. It's not an easy task. It's very kind of it's open, right? You're like, I thought we were just putting together a document, but it's actually diving deep into what's
Yeah, compared to like I've written tons of reports for clients over the years, and you know, I went into thinking of writing a book like, oh, it'd be like writing a report, but bigger, or like writing my thesis back when I was in grad school. But as I got into it, I realized, no, if I'm doing this the way I really want to do it, which is illuminating the concepts with story, it's a lot more challenging, and it took more grit internally than I initially started out with, but eventually got to. So
that is awesome. Thank you so much for guiding yourself, leading yourself through that process. And I'm just guessing there probably were people you surround yourself with people that helped through that journey. But thank you for doing that because as a reader, as somebody that loves to read, and I know a lot of people in the Leadership community, we're big on how do we keep educating ourselves, how do we surround ourselves with tools and resources, not just that give us steps, right, but that can actually connect us with other people. Like we're actually having when people pick up this book, they're going to be picturing themselves actually having coffee with you and you're talking. So it's a real conversation that they get to read from. But also, I love how it's very specific. I'm a process guy. I kind of like to think through process. That helps me see framework and just seeing 5 senses for success. I shared this with you. Usually, when I dive into before we have an interview, I kind of dive into it. I'm trying to do some research and look into it. And something when I looked at it today, I said, you know what? I kind of want to be surprised. I love that there's a surprise element here, but I do want to experience the insight that you share for the first time with the audience today by having you share a little bit about 5 senses. So, can I start with telling you what it sounds like to me, and then you redirect me to where what it really is?
okay, that sounds great, and redirect if necessary. I don't know, maybe you're right on. So
Awesome, awesome. I love this like real time discovery that we can kind of do here right on a podcast. I absolutely love it. So when I see 5 senses for success, right away I'm thinking senses. Okay, think about my senses, Jordan. Sight, hear, like our everyday senses that we go through, and I feel like we don't notice it until the first thing pops in my mind is I don't really notice a sense until I don't have it. It's like I have a buddy I just talked to. He doesn't have sight. When I talk to him, then I can imagine how his other senses compensate for it. So it's like for one thing, I guess the one thing is I'm wondering, wow, what what is in here in this book that maybe we don't even know about. It's kind of like this undiscovered. So what I'm thinking about your book, I'm thinking about we get to discover something that is crucial to our leadership, to our success, but sometimes it might not be so obvious. And that's where I'm at right now. That's kind of the hanger I'm on. It's like something that's so important, but maybe isn't so obvious until it's not there, which makes it even more exciting to jump in the book because I'm thinking if it's something that's crucial, I want it to be obvious. I don't want to find out on a surprise or on a bad decision. But that's kind of the hanger I'm at there. So maybe take me from that point and see where I'm at, how I'm understanding it so far.
So you're right on that it does have to do with the senses, the 5 senses that most of us realize. And I recognize that some do not realize all senses. And I agree that often we don't realize our senses, see, hear, feel, or touch. It actually is touch, taste, and smell. We don't often recognize them or pay attention to them um, unless there's something shocking or memorable. So if you see a sight that's shocking, like for instance, anybody who observed the building falling in Florida recently would have been shocked. Their sight would have kicked in at a higher level, a more attentive level. Similarly, if we smell something memorable from our childhood, we might have those memories surface. Let's say it's, I don't know, chocolate chip cookies, and you think of the times you gathered with your mother or grandmother or father and had that, so whatever it may be, when we have the heightened senses, they usually are when something isn't working the way we would expect, or when something shocking or memorable happens. So often I think of those kind of original or traditional five senses as a little bit passive. We can hear noises without paying attention to them, right? We hear, a ball bouncing in the street. We don't always pay attention to it. So the physical ability to do those things, if we're so blessed, is something that we don't always pay attention to. So what I did, and this was an evolution, I ended up taking those five senses and shifting them into what I see as more, as deeper, more meaningful senses for how we can be successful. And I would also say senses with which we should be more intentional, purposeful, so that we are using these wonderful senses that we've been given when we've been blessed with them, and maximizing what they can bring to us in value in our life. So the evolution is interesting because when I first started writing the book, I thought maybe these senses started back early career when I was asked to be a focus group moderator. And focus group moderating is very much listening driven. And I would realize as I got into doing these focus groups, often 2-hour sessions back to back, that when you're listening so long and so keenly and carefully and purposefully, you actually get exhausted. And so I realized in that early career that listening is something that takes a lot out of you if you're doing it really carefully. But then as I was reflecting through the process I described before, I realized that I really think that my idea around these concepts started its evolution way back in childhood. I grew up in a somewhat dysfunctional family, and I would observe and listen carefully to try and avoid situations that wouldn't end favorably for me. And so I realized through that reflection that things happened way back then. Then the idea for the senses actually came, back probably in 2015 when I started kind of sketching out the outline for the book. I believe it was kind of divine insight. I'm very spiritually driven, and I believe that the idea of packaging these concepts into the five senses and kind of taking a twist on them was something beyond me. It came to me. And then I just took that and was very grateful for it, and then really worked and massaged those ideas. Initially, I had different senses that I kind of moved them into, but when I talk about those now, so instead of see, I use observe. Instead of hear, I use listen. Instead of touch, I use feel. Instead of taste, I use engage. And instead of smell, I use appreciate. Now, some of those senses, the new ones, are pretty intuitive, like see to observe seems very intuitive. Some maybe less so, taste to engage. How do I get there? Well, it's my creative process, so I got to decide how to do that, I guess. But what I did is taste is a multisensory thing, right? We see our food, we feel it sometimes, we taste it, and we smell it even. And so I thought engaging with people is also multisensory, right? In terms of the new senses that I'm using. So I talk about kind of how I shifted each of those in the book. I did research on the concepts so I could understand how the typical senses worked, and then talk about how I shifted them into my new senses. So that's kind of how the book came to be. And so my new senses are observe, listen, feel, engage, and appreciate. And the other thing is, as I was going through that reflection and writing period, which was long, I also realized that other career steps and even training as a volunteer came into these senses. So I decided to become a volunteer mediator a number of years ago. And so I'm a qualified neutral for the state of Minnesota. And I realized that a lot of what I was learning in there also went into these senses. So And then things I learned as a leader in organizations and how to work with colleagues, my supervisor, my staff also came into play. So it was kind of a culmination of a lot of different learnings over my lifetime and even my formal education to come to this.
Wow, wow, that really helps put a lot of clarity, on just hearing you explain it. I'm so happy that I waited to get a little surprised by it today because to be honest with you, I think if I read that, it wouldn't have been as impactful to me in a sense, just to hear the tone, the volume, just the way that you shared a little bit of that journey and really touched on how each sense from see to observe, hear to listen, touch to feel, taste to engage, smell to appreciate. Um, I'll just share with you one that really stood out in the beginning, where the first one, like taste to engage, like you touched on that a little bit. And I thought for a while I worked in food and beverage, and I overseen one of the number one restaurant here in Hawaii, and yeah, I got a chance to work with some people, really like some amazing chefs, some world class chefs, and I always told them I'm not a foodie. I don't have that background, those, but I got to learn, I guess, in a sense of how they see things. And when you say taste to engage, um, sometimes I nerd out on things, so I don't know if this is going to be too much. But I do know that the first thing that it took me was where I know actually they were teaching, like when you're tasting, when you're doing a taste test, you want to actually open up your taste buds. You want to, so I'm thinking to engage in a group with a leader, you want an open conversation. You want people that's open. So that those quick associations just came to mind when you took it from taste to engage, and I'm thinking, wow. So it's getting me a little more excited and curious and thinking there is more to the senses and as a deeper connection, even in the leadership circles when you're trying to use these senses to pick up on is like, is this an open group, or are we kind of closed off? Because there can be a bit of a taste, like a little people will come in and you're working with, like you said, in these mentoring sessions that you'd have, or mediating sessions that you work with people. And, it's like when two people come in, but they're just kind of taking a little nibble of the conversation and the truth. They're not really tasting it yet. You want them to engage, and it's going to take a little bit more of opening up to actually engage in that process. So it's like noticing that, picking up on it with our leadership senses, with our five senses for success, and really being able to tell and discern, okay, right now we might be tasting, but let's go ahead and shift it so we can start engaging. And that process is to open up. Like I said, it's just, I'm nerding out on it, in a sense, but that's exactly where, that's the first thing that kind of hooked me because I'm thinking, I'm asking myself, like, how intentional, I love that word that you use, am I to really connecting on a deeper level to really lead better, to be a better leader in our day.
Right.
Any thoughts on that?
I absolutely love it. I've never had the association because I didn't have the same background as you about opening the taste buds and opening to what the experience of the group or even a one-on-one conversation is. I love that association. I'm actually going to, after this meeting, make a little note on that because I think that's fantastic. And I do believe that it is part of how do we open ourselves up for understanding another or a group of others, but let's say another at a deeper level. So all of the senses can help us do that. We often have surface understandings of people a lot of times in the workplace, right? So we have these surface level understandings, but how do we get to know somebody more deeply? What is their passion? What is their purpose? What are their goals personally in their career or elsewhere? And so by using these senses, we can start to discover that. You mentioned mediation, and I want to talk a little bit about that. So when I go into a mediation, and I do mediations with community mediations with people that might be neighbors who've had a conflict or people in households that have had a conflict, people who are divorced or separated and dealing with child sharing situations that are having conflict. And then I've also done through the Minnesota Department of human rights related mediations where I might have an employer and an employee coming to the table because they have a situation they're trying to address. So both of those situations, in both those situations, there's a long history typically of not having their minds match or meet to come to a common understanding. And so, one of the key things that mediators like myself do is after you bring two parties together and you have kind of your introductory, here's how mediation works, you offer each side some time for what we call uninterrupted time, where they get to tell their story from their perspective, their way, with no interruption. So I ask them, the other party, to be in a place of listening and really trying to understand what this person is saying. And I can't tell you the number of times when in a mediation like that, where I hear afterwards, I never heard that before. I never realized that. Why didn't you tell me? And it's because we haven't always been engaging and listening the way we do in that mediation, where it's really taking the time to understand that other person's perspective. So again, that's that sense of opening up to set aside our own perspectives, our own thoughts long enough to hear from all.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing that and going in. That's something too that, because I know just looking at your work and what you've done, one thing that I connected on is that the word conflict resolution, that you really found a way to kind of find great success in, and I why that's exciting is I feel like, we always say leadership starts with yourself, right? When you actually you can lead yourself well, and you want to start at that basis. But so much times how we operate in leadership has to do with other people too. We can't, the leader that's all by themselves that nobody's following them. It's like you're not, yes, you're leading yourself, but you want to influence other people. You want to impact other people. So to do that, once you bring other people in the mix, just by human nature, there will be some form of conflict. There'll be disagreement.
Well,
That's just that's working with people.
it
So
is, because we all come with our own points of view. So you're right.
absolutely, yeah, and it's like especially if there's great strengths and then there's drive that people have, and then there's great intention. A lot of times it can be people that are, I mean, I'm just thinking about in my experience where they're actually very much aligned, but there's just one spot that just keeps rubbing the situation, and that creates some conflict, and we see different ways of responding to that conflict. I know when I just think of anybody thinking of being, observing a leader in that situation, and some will turn a blind eye, like they don't want to deal with it and they just don't have the time for it, right? And they do other things that keep them going. And I get it because it's tough, but at the same time that almost makes it worse, by not making like it's not there, right? But then some people try to jump in it and they make it worse, right? It's like you put fuel into the flame and now it blows up, and now everybody has some kind of conflict going on. So I love that you're very intentional with it. I love that you found great success with it, and I'd love to spend some time if we could to see how this works. Because right when you said mediation, Julie, I looked at my notes and I thought, wow, that uninterrupted time, it's really like I would say a gym, or a what do you call these workouts now? These high intense workouts that everyone's doing, or maybe a high intense workout for our, yeah, our interval training for our five senses. Because I could imagine in that uninterrupted time, we have to shift what we see into what we observe. We have to take what we thought we heard and we have to really listen. We have to, think what we touch, what we got to really feel. So you're actually creating this space. And I know this is maybe one step that you do it one practical way, but to actually help people build and strengthen these five senses, by taking taste to engage and then smell to appreciate. And that, in a sense, really helps with that conflict resolution. So the first question I have on this is, um, what will be somebody if it's a brand new leader? I'm thinking about maybe somebody right in the gate, or maybe it's at home or work, and they have a sense of influencing somebody. It could be a parent that has siblings that are arguing at this conflict resolution, right? Siblings are a great example for that. But also even at work, if you have two people that maybe you hired somebody new on the team and the team was great, but now there's a bit of conflict, what would you encourage that first leader with conflict resolution? What would you share with them that they don't, first of all, do what most do and maybe run away from it?
Sure. So I think you're 100% right with that runaway idea. So when we find ourselves in a place of experiencing a relationship that's difficult or conflicting, we tend to avoid it. It's human nature. And so instead of avoiding, I highly recommend we engage. So, so I want to talk about that idea, and then I also want to get to the new leader idea. So when we have these difficult relationships that we tend to step away from, I like to talk to people about how, let's talk about a ball. If you roll a ball, it will roll for a while and stop. And after a while, if you want that ball to roll again, you're going to have to give it an impetus, a force, to get it rolling again. So you have to pick it up and roll it again. I think relationships are like that. We have to give them impetus or touch points where we continue to make the relationship move forward. If we avoid, we can't make the relationship move forward. And that actually makes the relationship more difficult instead of helping to improve. So with those difficult relationships, I like to talk to people about going to them with a sense of discovery and thinking about what are questions I can ask that I don't know the answers to, that that person could give me more information so I might understand them better. So it's very much a mediation tactic. As I'm asking questions of the two sides of the mediation, my goal is to find where is their common ground. So when we go to somebody that we're having a difficult question or a relationship with, we can go with the idea, how can I find where our common ground is? How can I find where we meet? Because you can build on that. So we need to set aside our own perspectives to do that. And when we have a difficult or challenging relationship, we often have anxiety or fear about that relationship. We almost always have a sense of distrust about it, right? And when we are sitting in those spaces, we actually shut down to some degree our ability to observe, fully listen, fully engage with another. Another thing that happens in the feel realm is that we either can shut down our feelings and pretend we don't have them, or we can try to override the other with our feelings, right? I've seen it on both sides of that spectrum. Mm-hmm. And really what we want is something in the middle. We are all human, even in the workplace, though some people may not agree with that thought process. That's my belief. And I don't think it makes sense to shut down our feelings in the workplace. I think it makes sense to acknowledge them in a healthy, appropriate way. And our healthy, appropriate way in the workplace may look different than our healthy, appropriate way at home. There is a different sense of level of intimacy and sharing our thoughts and beliefs and all of that. But I still think that we are feeling beings as humans, and going into these relationships, especially those difficult ones, with some of those concepts. And again, that sense of discovery is great. So where I got that idea with the ask a question you don't know the answer to, I went through training with Judith Glazier when she was alive. She's the author of Conversational Intelligence, and amazing. So one of the other things that I learned in that training was about building trust. So when we're going to this difficult relationship, one of the best ways to build trust is to try to co-create together. So by going with that sense of discovery and then moving into how can we address whatever our challenge is, whether it's the relationship as a whole, whether it's a specific project or task we're working on, whether it's a leader trying to hold a staff member accountable, whatever the situation is, it's trying to figure out a way to co-create. Because when we co-create together, an amazing thing happens physiologically. Our brains actually start to mirror each other. So they have done in various organizations fMRI studies where they actually see in trust states how our brains will mirror each other. So we want to try and get to that state with people. And by finding that common ground and building on it, that's how we do that. Now, addressing the new leader. So I think as new leaders, often, I was a new leader at one point, often we are given, so we often grow up in an organization, so to speak. So we might have certain technical or individual contributor skills that have been successful, we've done well at, and then we're put into management. And often when we're put into management, we're given the tools to do things like manage time for our staff, if that's a thing, do performance reviews, the technical things, budget management. But we often aren't given those soft skills and how to really coach, because coaching is interesting. And then how to have those difficult conversations. One of the most common themes that I work with leaders on when I'm coaching is accountability. It's very different. It's the hardest part of leading, is having those accountability conversations. So for the new leader, I would say try to figure out a way to understand and learn some of those soft skills if those aren't things that you've already done. Figure out ways to get that training, to get that knowledge. Try to find a mentor who can help you evolve your leadership skills. So I would recommend some of those.
I love it. Thank you.
Yeah, and then one more thing, circling back to the difficult conversation. When you go with that sense of discovery to that conversation for that touch point, also try to think of what can I appreciate that person for aloud. So thanking them for something, telling them what you think is valuable that they bring to the table, whatever it is. Because just by doing that sense of discovery and that appreciation together, it's a magic thing. It is amazing. Because if one person comes to a relationship that has been conflicting differently, it will change the relationship, no matter what the other person's coming with. By one party changing, it can change.
I've taken several, I guess you want to say, classes or conversations around it, and so much of it is coming like back to life as you're sharing, because I'm like, wow, like this is something. I mean, just hearing you walk us through that, I think it just raised the importance once again. From it's like we know there's conflict resolution, we know that we have it in when we're working with people, human interaction, but sometimes it doesn't seem as important until it's urgent, until it's right there in our face, right? And then we're like, oh no, okay, where do I dig deep into my skills that I have never worked on, but I read a little blog post on? It's like, what do I do now? And we're trying to look for the tools for it. But maybe
we might do a quick search, right?
Yeah, I have a meeting, do a quick search, and run into it. And with that, it's like, okay, so hearing you walk us through it is like, okay, now we understand that we have to make sure we see the true importance of it and not let an urgent situation um, cause us to kind of wing it, because when I look at it, it's like one of the most important things I really believe is in leadership is that you're working with other people, and you can intensify things in a good way, and you can intensify it as in a bad way. So what you do as a leader is kind of you multiply, the situation in a good way or in a bad way. And none of us as a leader want to be the one that walks away and is like, oh, wow, they just made it 10 times worse, you know? So knowing that is like, when we have conflict resolution, I took some notes, and I know a lot of us in the leadership community, whether you're driving or listening in, writing down notes is a really important thing, because then we can draw back to it. So a few notes that came to mind was that process of discovery. I love that first thing that you kind of shared, where you come with questions, not with not with I guess in a sense like pointing a finger. Because sometimes if there's conflict resolution, one extreme situation can be, okay, stop the conflict, you do this, like just giving direction. But it's like, no, let's have discovery where we can actually go ahead, ask questions, and it's a big shift rather than telling people where to go, but seeing where they're at, right? Asking questions like, where are they really at right now? And having that time to do it. Now, in the thick of it, a lot of times we feel the pressure as leaders, whether it's at home, like I said, in home leadership, or at work, or in your business. And I'm sure you're very used to that too, by your experience, by working with people, but also in your personal experience by being an author and by, founding that company. It's like, it's in the pressure of it. What do you do when it's in the moment, when conflict resolution just arises? And what would you be in that moment? How do we guide someone to discovery, to a place to discover? Is that a separate, like, maybe describe the environment that you would say works best? Is it good to do it on the spot, or would you recommend somebody to change that environment and go somewhere else? What would be the best way?
So I would say it depends, and let me talk a little bit more about that. So when we're in the thick of conflict, which is what I think you're asking,
Yes.
whether it's at home or at work, whether I say address it immediately or later depends on how heightened we are. So we have, I think many people have heard about our amygdala getting triggered. So once our amygdala gets triggered in our brain, which is part of our more our prehistoric kind of brain parts, it actually reduces our ability to access our prefrontal cortex, which is where we actually have rational thought and the ability to problem solve and all the things we need if we're addressing a conflict.
Wow.
So if we're highly heightened, if we are feeling really tense and we feel those signs in our body, then I would say break first.
Right.
Let calm in the brain until we know we can access our frontal part of our brain and then come back together. It is you often hear, if you're angry, take a break, take a walk, whatever. Those are all ways to calm that reaction. If it's a slight conflict where that hasn't come into play, where you aren't feeling that body response, I think it can be addressed immediately with feeling a question. So if I ever found myself, or even with clients, if I find myself starting to get tense because I'm not liking something I'm hearing, I immediately, but I've practiced this for a long time, I immediately try to go into discovery. So I try not to make any declarative statements at that point. I try to ask questions at that point. So if I'm not super heightened, that's where I go. If I'm heightened, or if it's a personal situation, like my husband and I have had conflict, as anybody who's been married has,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
we have actually sometimes used, so that idea of uninterrupted time, we've actually used like a kitchen timer periodically to say, okay, here's your 3 minutes. And then the other one will listen more fully than if we're just back and forth, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we will use little tactics like that, but we've been married, 28 years. So it's like we've worked through a lot of the kinks over time.
Right.
Not to say that I'm perfect about it ever. I mean, while I'm very familiar with these concepts, I still make mistakes. We are all human. There are times I don't handle a conversation well, and then I'll reflect upon it afterward. And actually, that brings me back to something you said earlier, that one of the things I also embed in my book is that these senses, these new 5 senses, are usable with others, but they're also important for our own self-reflection. So we are able to observe our own body response, our own thoughts. We are able to listen to ourselves, to really try to dig deeper and understand that. We are able to get in touch with our feelings. I can tell you that because I was raised in a dysfunctional family, I had learned early on how to shut my feelings down very well. I became kind of quiet and flat. And when I became kind of a mid-20-ish person, I realized I needed to go to therapy, which I did. And then I started, the therapist would ask me, how does that make you feel? I'm like, I have no clue. I don't know. I honestly don't know. So I went through this time period where I really had to start reflecting on what do I feel? And I would try to name it. And it was a challenge for me for a while. But trying to understand how we're feeling and how we react as a result of those feelings. And then we can engage with ourselves. We can give ourselves time to understand ourselves. We can give ourselves time to meditate, to exercise, whatever the things are, right? But to really nurture ourselves, our own relationship, just like we would nurture a relationship with someone else. And then in the appreciation, well, I think that's the hardest for most people, to self-appreciate. I think we automatically are very self-judgmental, and we easily see our flaws, our mistakes, and it's much more difficult for us as humans to recognize when we do something well, to appreciate when we've handled a conversation well, when we've accomplished something, whatever it may be. So all of the senses can be used for self-healing.
I'm so happy we're having this conversation today, Julie. I really am. I'm just thinking that, the value that somebody listening to this is going to gain by really, really having these things that it's kind of like it's common, but maybe it's not as consistent in our conversation, in leadership. And like we it's very common, we see these things, but maybe what's so common needs to be a little bit more consistent because it's really good reminders in a sense to know that we hear it before. I say it all the time, and it's maybe a little bit more common that we hear leadership starts with yourself. But when you just shifted everything with the senses to yourself, it's almost a sigh of relief. I'm just like, wow, like look at this. Like, how do you observe yourself better? How do you really listen to yourself? Are we? And you need to go through it. Do you feel? Do you engage? Do you appreciate? And going through that questions, I can just imagine the strength, the more, I guess I want to say the core building of a leader that happens before they go out there and they interact with other people. In a sense, maybe even say I'd say it better prepares them for conflict resolution and everything else. But I know that's been a conversation that we've been, on right now is that conflict resolution. I do want to make note too on the example that you mentioned with the ball and how you kind of answered, how to dive in when it's in the thick of it. Because I really appreciate that you kind of took um, you took it from both ends. It wasn't like a cookie cutter answer. You really looked at it. I really feel your answer was very like a real life situation because as you said it, I mean, I'm just thinking, wow, that's so true. Like if it's heightened, if it's intense, you just, I mean, I don't want to re-say because you said it so much better, but biologically, we are not ready. Our mind is not ready to dive into that area right now. Biologically, like you said, from the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex, like we're asking people to do things that is just they're not capable to do, or I'd say very difficult to do because biologically everything is intense. So it's important in that situation in the thick of it to step away and then to come back. And then if it's not, what I loved about this part is that when you said if it's not that heightened, sometimes the smaller conflict resolutions actually don't even get a touch because it's the leader at work, it's the manager, it's a new, and they don't want to dive into it because it's not big yet, it's not major. I'm not going to dive in it, but we're learning it should be the opposite. That's the perfect time to go there and like if the example like you mentioned with the ball, like if we don't continue to put a touch on it, what happens is it stops rolling, and then one day we have to push really hard to get momentum again. But if we
Nice.
just have that quick conversation, like you're saying, right? And hey, I noticed something happened today at lunch. I noticed there was a disagreement here. And we just kind of step into it because it's not heightened yet, right? That's the time to actually step into it and have that conversation starting with discovery. Because most times I don't want to, it's not major yet. I'm not going to dive into it, but it actually festers and they can go home with it and it can cause more bitterness. So to stop
Yes.
and right, it just replays. It was a moment at lunch that somebody didn't pass the ketchup, but it just festers and festers and they don't like me and they hate me and it wasn't, it's just our minds, right?
Do odd things. Yeah, I agree. It is very important at that early moment to think about how can I address this immediately, or even if sometimes if it's something I observe in a group setting, I might wait until I have a one-on-one with that person that I notice something, and I would say, I observed whatever it was, your reaction to something. Can you tell me more about what was going on for you? So it's kind of, taking that step away if it was a group and you don't want to do it in the group because sometimes that's not appropriate, but you still want to understand, right? So
Right.
I agree with that. I also want to say that so definitely all of these senses are important in conflict or challenging conversations. But also, if you think about all the tasks a leader does, a formal leader, so they have to develop strategy for whatever their group is, their purview is. Um, they have to motivate, influence others. They have to work with their colleagues and their manager, sometimes boards or shareholders, depending on the scope of their role. there are a lot of places where we have touch points in order to be successful as a leader. We have to influence people all over the place. And these skills that are talked about in the five senses for success are the very ones that help us become able to influence. We kind of put pennies of credibility in the jar, if you will. As we work with people well over time using these senses, we kind of plop some pennies or quarters or whatever into a jar of credibility. And as that jar fills, when we do make a mistake, because we all do, that credibility is already there, and the people are going to be much more forgiving around, right? So I think it's
very true.
Leader does, and even outside of leadership, when we think of people using just their personal leadership, anything that we want to do, any goal that we have, typically touches with somebody else, more than one somebody else. So if we want to have a successful marriage, we need to relate. If we want to raise children well, we need to relate. If we want to serve our church community well, we need to relate. If we want to become a politician, we need to relate. Whatever it is, we need these skills.
Right, right. And five senses, not every human can. I think it kind of equalizes the play field, because if we think about our regular tastes, we see people. I have friends, and I'm sure you do. Anybody's listening that maybe they have their hearing is impaired, or I have some that maybe their sight, they're not able to see. I have a buddy that he's losing it because MS. They're losing their ability to see. So we have those senses that we're given day to day that isn't equal, right? Like some people have a better strength of touch, they have a better sensitivity to it. But here, what you're talking about more is something that really equals the field. Even somebody that doesn't have sight can have vision by observing, right? So it really equals the field, where it's not on our physical senses. This is more of a different way of looking at leadership and our interaction with people, that it really levels the field if we're intentional with building them. For one, I'd say if we're intentional to learn them. So the first thing is we got to learn them. We got to jump in the book. We have to learn them to see what they are. I know you covered them right here, but we really got to just take it in and see, okay, how do we make it our own? How do we really
and
put it
under
in our
each of
life?
the concepts in the book, I talk about tactics to do that. Yes.
Oh, wow. That's awesome. That's awesome. So even more so, right? When we jump in a book, we see the framework of it, but we can really see how we can implement it, because you'll give tactics in there on how we can put that in our life. And then after that is, how do we be intentional by keep building it like anything else, right? How do we sharpen our sight? How do we make sure that we're observing and better, or listening? Because you're right. You said this earlier in the podcast, but you mentioned like I was so confused in my early days of leadership when they would just have us listen, and then I would go home exhausted, and I'm like, why am I so tired? I didn't do much today. What did I do? We was in meetings all day, and it's like, but you're just so exhausted. So listening, if we're not doing it kind of like reps, or walking, if we go walking in the neighborhood, if we're not intentionally doing it more and more, and we wait for that one time that things blow up, we're not ready for it. So it's a way to, how do we intentionally getting ourselves ready by one, learning the information that you have in the book, the framework and the tactics. Thank you so much as an author for putting that in there. Thank you. Because sometimes, we can read something and it's like it gets us hope, but at the end I'm like, how do I put it in my life? So thank you for putting that in, some tactics in there. I'm thinking story. That's what coming to mind. I'm curious on a story that would come to mind that you think would be very effective to share in today's conversation, for us at Leader Seeds. Maybe around conflict resolution, maybe more around five senses, but a story, a real life story, without being specific, keeping things confidential, but something you've experienced by somebody, um, that you got a chance to work with. And as you think about it quickly, the two perspectives. I love how we talked about the brand new leader, but I also know that you work with different forms, from brand new leadership to top level CEOs, and there's different decisions, there's different heightened sense of senses. So if a story comes to mind, at that level, with conflict resolution, what would be something that you would share that you would think would be very impactful, here?
So I was a mid-level manager in an organization, was senior director, so maybe a little higher than mid-level, depending on your definition of mid-level. And I reported to a VP, and the reporting line had recently shifted. I had been in the organization longer, reported to somebody else, but recently shifted to this. I had been hired originally in this organization to improve the service that the department I led provided to our clients. And over my, I think it was 6 years there, I had greatly improved the department interface to the point that the organization provided more resources and we grew the department. So it was a successful department. When we moved into different leadership, or where we were reporting ultimately, that leader and I didn't see eye to eye, and always. And there came one situation. It was actually sort of shortly before I ended up leaving, where he had said, "We need to cut your budget." And we had a pretty constant budget for the last years. I always used it effectively with the group, and it was, I was not over budget or anything each year. And there were not other budget cuts going on. So I was arguing why we should not cut the budget. The way I was arguing was not following 5 sentences. And actually, I knew within myself that I was probably even stepping over a line where I could put my job at risk. I was arguing that adamantly. I wasn't listening. I will say I don't think the other person was listening either. Neither of us was going in with a sense of discovery. And we had a couple of very heated conversations. And reflecting on it after, as I was writing the book, I realized how much I had set aside what I knew about these things. And I hadn't, put them into this framework yet, but I knew some of these things. And how I had let the feelings I was feeling about that cut budget, which was going to impact training for my team, and how adamantly I wanted that for my team, I let that feeling impact how I was approaching him. And I didn't step away always, which I should have. I didn't go in with discovery questions. I didn't do any of the things that I, have kind of refined into verbiage now in this book. I didn't do that. So that would be a story I would share.
Thank you for sharing that story, that very real life story. And I'm just thinking anyone that's probably listening here either can relate directly to that situation, or there's a really great chance that they observed that situation that someone was going through. So it's a very real conversation that happened for you, and I think it resonates and is able to relate for a lot of people listening today. So thank you for that. Once again, just hearing from that story, it makes it very real to know why we should really jump in to learn these 5 senses and also take the tactics that Julie talks about in the book to really implement it in our day. Here at Leader Seeds, we're really big on not just learning information, but actually living it out too. We want to be able to learn more. We want to grow, but the true sense of growing is actually taking those steps into what we've learned, So thank you for making it, for giving us that tool, that resource that we can do that in. It was a great conversation. I learned so much today in the podcast. I'm even more excited about, really diving more into this and seeing, okay, how am I taking these senses, Jordan, and where am I at with it? If you had one last thing, one final thing to say, the premises we've been kind of putting it with here in Leader Seeds podcast is that if we are having breakfast, because that was your favorite meal, and we had a great breakfast, and we had everything that we could have had, and we're ready to go ahead. The coffee's being topped off, and we're about to kind of go about our day. What will be the one last thing that you would encourage somebody here that's listening today, pertaining directly to 5 senses for success or conflict resolution?
I would say that no matter where you've been, no matter what you've done, and I shared one story where I didn't do it well, and I have many, many more, there is always a possibility for hope. We can always shift, we can always learn, and we can always improve what we do in the future. So I want to leave it with that sense of hope. I really believe that as humans, we are learning beings and we can evolve. And I would just set that out there.
I absolutely love it. I love it. A lot of times things will stop because the we stop believing that there's hope. You know, maybe we made a bad decision or a bad mistake, a big mistake, I'd say, and that really interrupts that pattern, like how you said, that visual of the ball keep being pushed, you know, and just having that touch point on it. So thank you so much for those genuine words of encouragement that you shared here today. Thank you guys for listening in, Leadership Community. Thank you for playing full out and taking notes. I know I got a bunch of notes here that some is answered, and I'm going to actually connect back with Julie after, and I'll give you ways that you can do that to stay connected to Julie if you have even more questions and you want to learn more about 5 senses for success and any questions around conflict resolution, or just to know what she's doing there, you know, with peer performance and stuff. Just another great person to connect with. So we'll leave that in the description, and like anything else. And in the two last questions that we have, one of that, Julie, is you mentioned that breakfast was the best meal. What Describe what's in that breakfast? For you, like, let us see what's on the plate.
Okay. If I had my druthers, it would be eggs, sausage, hash browns, and then some kind of breakfast pastry. And that could be a variety. So it could be a pancake or a waffle or whatever. Now, that's a lot of food, and I don't eat it all. So what I tend to do is eat like parts of everything, but I like all the flavors.
It's like a mini buffet. It's like a mini buffet. I love it. I love it.
And I forgot fruit as well.
There you go. There you go. I love it. I love it. Well, thank you for that. Thank you. That mini buffet. I think one thing I love about breakfast too is I'm big on how you start things, and I love how you start the day. You know, you can have a day with a good meal and move forward there. That just popped to my mind. But the last question we always ask everyone here, because we're trying to be a community, and I think we do a great job just getting a chance to talk to everybody here that's leaving reviews and that reaches out to me. I think you guys are all doing a great job, Leadership Community, at not just being some people that are saying we're growing, but are actually going out there and being intentional with growing. So we're always trying to grow to what we say is all things in excellence. So we want to do all things in excellence. And Julie, the last question is we ask every guest that we have here because we want to be good hosts. We want to make you feel featured and special as best as possible. So how was your time here with Leader Seats?
It was wonderful. I enjoy speaking with you so much. I think you're an excellent listener. I will just say that listening skill. And the questions that you formulate are amazing indeed. So thank you very much for that. And thank you very much to all the listeners who are also here with us.
Awesome, awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that here. It's just some way we just want to know if we love feedback because feedback helps us grow, right? We can know where we at right now and how do we continue to grow. Thank you for spending not just your time with us today, but thank you for all the things that you've overcome to get here today. All the things that you had to overcome to get to 5 senses for success. All the things you had to overcome to start peer performance, you know, and all of this. So it's inspiring, and I thank you for our conversation today. With that being said, we'll wrap up for today. So with that being said, everyone here at Leader Seeds Community, thank you guys for playing full out. I'll leave in the description ways to connect with Julie. But Julie, you did have some things to share with them of what you wanted to offer or different ways that they can connect with you. Is that correct?
Sure. So I think you're going to be posting some ways they can get discounts on the book. And then I have an ebook that is about leadership. So if you're interested in that, you can check that out. And then also I would like to offer to anybody listening now or in the future that if you are interested in having a conversation with me, I'm willing to give you anybody in the community a 45-minute free coaching session to address a specific situation that you have going on, whatever that may be. So happy to do that for everybody. And you can just reach out to me at the links that Jordan will be placing below, and then just mention this podcast, and then we can get together and connect.
Outstanding. Thank you so much for going out there and once again raising the bar. We was here for a great conversation today, but as you know, if you've listened to the conversation, Julie just kind of just mentioned some discounts on the book. Just look for the descriptions below. She also mentioned an ebook. Jump into that. Look at that right there, a resource you can have today. Literally download today, and then also a way to just really have a real life conversation with the author. Like that's amazing to have 45 minutes to kind of have a conversation with you personally. So thank you so much, Julie, for that.
I appreciate you inviting me on, and I truly enjoyed our conversation today.
Outstanding. Well, with that being said, guys, we always strive for great conversations around high impact and healthy leadership. I'm excited. We dive deep into this stuff, but at the same time, don't take my kind of curious mode as not a level of excitement. I am stoked that you spent some time with us here on the episode today. I'm so glad that Julie got a chance to kind of share with us the process of how she's helping people today and kind of give us some really key insight on how we can put it into practice today. Take one thing that you learned today in the podcast, you guys, and go out there and make it happen. With that being said, we'll sign off today and we'll say goodbye to Julie and to everyone listening today. Thanks, guys.